Welcome, everyone. My name is Farima Pour-Khorshid, and I am a former elementary school teacher. I'm also a grassroots organizer with the Teachers for Social Justice, the People's Education Movement, and I'm also a very proud board member of the Education for Liberation Network, as well as an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco. So we want to start off by just taking a moment of silence and deep breaths for the countless Black lives that have been lost to state-sanctioned violence. We hold heavy hearts for the recent murders of Rayshard Brooks, Toyin Salau, Robert Fuller, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, Nina Pop, Ahmaud Arbery, and for all Black lives that have been murdered at the hands of white supremacy, including the thousands of lives lost to COVID-19, which has disproportionately impacted Black lives. Thank you. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the stolen, occupied, unceded, lonely land that I am joining you from here in the California Bay Area. And I invite you to also acknowledge the stolen land that you are on and share its indigenous name in the chat. There is a phone app called Native Land that can help you to learn the name of the indigenous land that you are anywhere you ever go, so that you can also continue to show reverence to and acknowledge when you are on occupied indigenous land. This is important because the theft of indigenous land is part of a centuries-long genocide and ongoing project of settler colonialism. And we recognize that these are ongoing struggles for Native nations, and that indigenous peoples should never be mistaken as ethnic groups, because they are in fact nations, and many are working to restore their sovereignty. And so while I acknowledge and express gratitude for the Ohlone people who have been living on and working this land for centuries, I also recognize that our work must go beyond words, and we must struggle with all First Nations who are working to protect their land and their people. And so as we discuss abolition in schools and beyond today, we must also always commit to including Indigenous voices and wisdom in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our communities. And so in collaboration with this land acknowledgement, we ask that you also join us in committing to researching more about the people whose land you are currently standing on, or on which you teach on, or on which your family lives on. Review recent reviews of books by Native authors, reviewed by Native reviewers, so as to inform what books you use to teach about Native people and history in your classrooms, and that you commit to being in solidarity with all Native people wherever you are. And lastly, let us not forget the US government's policies that continue to lock up migrants, including asylum seekers who are often families with young children. These prisons often exacerbate the trauma that asylum seekers face and impede access to legal counsel. So let us continue to press the US government to end these harmful policies and permit individuals to pursue their claims in the community.
Thank you, Farima. And I'm going to be pasting these comments into the ASL webinar. There's been some issues with that feed. So just to let everybody know, I'm going to paste those into the comments in that feed. And then hopefully we can get the video working again. So hi, everyone. My name is Chrissy Hernandez. I am also a former high school educator, and I am an assistant professor at CSU Monterey Bay with the Service Learning Institute. For the past 2 years, the Critical Resistance and Education for Liberation, Abolition and Education Working Group has been organizing resources from across the nation to build Lessons in Liberation, an abolitionist toolkit for educators, which will be released in 2021 by AK Press. And we're very excited about sharing that with you. To quote Critical Resistance's definition, Prison Industrial Complex, or PIC abolition, is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. From where we are now, sometimes we can't really imagine what abolition is going to look like. Abolition isn't just about getting rid of buildings full of cages. It's also about undoing the society we live in, because the PIC both feeds on and maintains oppression and inequalities through punishment, violence, and controls millions of people. Because the PIC is not an isolated system, abolition is a broad strategy. An abolitionist vision means that we must build models today that can represent how we want to live in the future. It means developing practical strategies for taking small steps that move us toward making our dreams real, and that lead us all to believe that things really could be different. It means living this vision in our daily lives. Abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal, unquote. Lessons in Liberation is a multimedia toolkit that documents how educators, young people, organizers, and communities are building and practicing abolition in their schools and neighborhoods, with examples and analysis of grassroots campaigns, first-person narratives about curricular projects, arts, music, and descriptions about restorative healing, Indigenous, and transformative justice practices in classrooms. Our hope is that this toolkit will not only function to generate dialogue and practice, but that it will also elevate and network the politically urgent work that is in process in our schools and neighborhoods. This is a time when we urgently need to talk about and challenge the policies and practices that render communities, including young people, disposable. This is especially true for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and especially those further marginalized by disabilities, gender, sexuality, and other forms of identity that place Black, Indigenous, people of color folks at higher risk of violence. We want to thank our ASL interpreters. Juan Ramirez and Norma Sanchez, as well as Stefanit Hubtom and Erica Miners, who will be moderating our next webinar, which will focus on abolitionist organizing and education, as well as everyone at Hala for supporting this work. So thank you all, and please keep an eye out for that webinar coming soon. We also want to thank all of the organizers and contributors to Lessons in Liberation, including the panelists who are here today, who I'll introduce now. Dr. Bettina Love is an award-winning author and associate professor of educational theory and practice at the University of Georgia. She wrote the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive: Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, and Hip Hop's Little Sista Speak: Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and Politics in the New South. Her research and work addresses a range of topics, including anti-Blackness in schools, hip hop education, Black girlhood, queer youth, hip hop feminism, art-based education to foster youth civic engagement, and issues of diversity and inclusion. Carla Shalaby is a research and staff member at the University of Michigan who thinks about the critical role our youngest children and their teachers play in the struggle for freedom. She's the author of the book, Troublemakers: Lessons in Freedom from Young Children at School. 100% of the royalties from her book go directly to the Education for Liberation Network to support programming like this. Marylin Zuniga is a first grade teacher in Fruitvale, Oakland, California, the educational director of Mycelium Youth Network, and director of elementary education at Quetzal Education Consulting. Marylin believes education is a calling, and she makes sure to lead with spirit and center love in everything she does. Sagnicthe Salazar is a first-generation migrant a grassroots organizer and educator who has dedicated the last 18 years of his life to organizing for cultural, educational work, and human rights of Rasa communities and other third world communities. He is the Dean of Restorative Discipline at Elmhurst United Middle School in Oakland and trains educators and other communities in transformative justice through Rigorous Love, where he serves as a co-founder. And finally, Stephanie Cariaga is an assistant professor of teacher education at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and founding member of People's Education Movement, Los Angeles. She centers wholeness, healing, and intimacy in all of her work as a literacy teacher, teacher educator, mother, partner, daughter, sister, and more. So welcome to all of our incredible panelists. So we've gotten a ton of questions and comments naming particular positionalities and interests in how to engage with abolition. So this includes from administrators, classroom teachers, brand new teachers, parents, families, organizers, people of color, white people, school librarians, students, and teacher educators. So from each of your particular vantage points, what does abolitionist teaching mean to you? And what do you think abolitionist teaching can look, sound, feel like in and out of schools? And we're gonna go ahead and start with Dr. Bettina Love.
Thank you all so much for having me. This is an absolute honor to be here. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Farima. And to the other panelists, I'm just in awe of what you all were able to put together in such short time and just the response that it got. So the first thing that I want to say when we think about abolitionist teaching is power to the people. That's first and foremost, power to the people. Because when we talk about abolitionist teaching and all the context that you offered, from the idea of librarians to teachers to administrators, to parents, there's one thing we have to be very clear of. When we say abolitionist teaching, we're not talking about reimagining. We're not talking about reforming. We are talking about the idea that we are going to abolish systems that are oppressive and harmful to Black and brown people. We're going to abolish systems that are anti-Black. And so that means that we're not going to sit here and say, we're going to try and put a Band-Aid on this thing. We're going to try and figure this thing out. So when we talk about abolitionist teaching, what we need folks to do is move in these levels. There's levels to this stuff. So what has to happen is you go from being someone who's racist to acknowledging that you're racist, to someone that says, well, I'm not racist, then someone that says that, well, I'm doing anti-racist work, and then you get to this point where you're an abolitionist, which means that you are willing to dismantle oppressive systems and create alternative spaces. Because what we know is that this social contract, this social experiment called democracy has failed Black people. And that's not to say that we haven't gotten anything from democracy, that's to say that everything we've gotten from democracy, we have fought for. And so if now you're sitting here at home and we're frustrated and we're mad and we're watching what is happening to Black bodies, we have to understand that this social contract has failed us. When Black folks make up 13% of the population, but represent 27% of COVID-19 deaths. The New York Times reported today that half of adults are unemployed, half of Black adults are unemployed because of COVID-19 and racism. Well, we're in a system that non-white schools get $23 billion less funding. Well, we're in a system where Black and brown schools are policed and a part of the prison industrial complex. And so the idea of abolitionist teaching sits on the work of folks like Erica Minor, folks like David Stovall, folks like Farima, folks like Charlene Carruthers, folks like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and the one and only Angela Davis, that have told us over and over and over again, you can't reform this monster. You can't try to think that you can put a Band-Aid on this monster. What we are trying to talk about is changing the conditions that create this monster, that uphold this monster, that lets this monster eat and breathe. The monster that lets somebody put their knee in a man's throat for over 8 hours, that's a monster. And if you think you can reform that, then you are not at the level right now of abolitionists. You are still in this place of maybe I'm not racist, maybe I am racist, and I'm moving through the cycles. But we are asking that you move much, much quicker. We need you to get there quicker because lives are on the line. So the idea today and moving forward, as you engage with abolitionist teaching, as you engage with the ideas of being radical and the ideas of what democracy really is, you have to know first and foremost that Black folks have given this country democracy. And we will continue to fight. We will continue to organize. But anybody at home that is Black or brown listening, understand that you have nothing to be ashamed of right now. We did not start this, and it's not our job to end it. White folks got to end this. And they got to want to be a part of this. And not performative, not from the sidelines. You got to be deeply want to be a part of what it means to be an abolitionist. That means you are willing to destroy what you have benefited from. And that is what we're asking you to do as abolitionists, to destroy a system that benefits you every single day. And I understand that's a hard thing to think about. It's a hard thing to do. But if you want justice and you say you want justice and this is past just a performance, then that is what we're asking as abolitionists. So as teachers, as organizers, as community folk, this is about dismantling a system that is oppressive. This is about dismantling a system that is hell-bent on killing Black and brown folks. And this is about dismantling a system that only knows the word justice when it's convenient and still doesn't understand what that means. And so we're not here to have a conversation about reimagining, about reshaping, about reforming. We're here to have a conversation about what it means to be an abolitionist.
Great, thank you. And Carla?
Thank you for that. I want to echo just the start with gratitude for the organizers and also for everybody who's joining us. And I also really just want to start by sending just love, all the love that I have to every one of you out there right now who I know is hurting for a variety of reasons and feeling deep, deep pain. I hope you know that. I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we're sending our love to each of you and all of you. So as Bettina just said, abolition is about dismantling any practice, policy, institution, behavior, belief that furthers the idea that there is ever a such thing as a throwaway person, that there's ever a such thing as a disposable person. To have any of those practices or institutions, for us to believe that prisons are even a thing that ever should exist, we have to believe certain things about people. And one of the things we have to believe is that there are people who deserve to be in a cage. We have to be able to believe that. And one of the things that I think about the most is not only tracking on how much work it takes to make that such a natural belief to us when it should strike our ears as an assault, that ever we should accept such a thing, but that in fact it's a very normal and normalized belief, this idea that there are people who we not only throw away, but who actually deserve and chose that to be their fate. So when I think about abolition, I think also about Mariame Kaba, who I feel like I've learned the most from about abolition. And she always is reminding us that abolition is not just about ending things, but it's also about building what we want instead, imagining what we want instead, starting to dream up that model and starting to practice all of the skills and other things that we're going to need for what that world without police and what that world without prisons is going to actually require of us. A free world is actually going to require a very high standard from each of us. And so when I think about building those things, and because I work with early childhood educators and kindergarten teachers, I feel like my main project is trying to help a kindergarten teacher understand what does teaching a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or a 6-year-old have to do with abolishing police and prisons. And to me, I always go back to thinking, what are the ideas that support prisons and policing, and what are the opposite of all of those ideas? Because the opposite of all of those ideas would be the content that we want to teach for abolitionist teaching. So if we know that prisons and policing teaches that there is a such thing as a throwaway person. Then abolitionist teaching would teach that there is never a such thing, and that the opposite of throwaway people is a really radical kind of love, a really radical kind of inclusion. And because that is so different than how we operate now, I really believe educators are critical and key, because we have to build our children up with these ideas to be anti-abolitionist from the get. And so every time I say that we have to all kind of have this agreement that there's a such thing as throwaway people, teachers tell me, no, I don't. Of course, I don't think that, right? And so I just will leave with one example just to help us raise our awareness of how invisible and how ubiquitous this belief in throwaway people is. And I do it this way. Every time I hear abolitionists speak and they say we don't need prisons, there will always be the person who's like, okay, but what about the, and they just kind of come up with like the most heinous, despicable kind of person that they can conjure, who's done the most despicable kinds of things. What about that person? What do we do with that person? That is always what people who talk about abolition have to deal with. And so to educators who think that they don't share that belief, I will tell you that when I work with preschool teachers, when I work with kindergarten teachers, and I talk to them about let's just not actually expel preschoolers. Let's just commit to not kicking out 3 or 4-year-olds. The number one thing that I get from them is, but what about, and they paint for me the most heinous, most difficult, most unteachable sort of 2 or 3 or 4-year-olds that they can conjure. And in those moments, I really realize, like, I'm working with an educator and they're doing this work to convince me that there is a such thing as a throwaway person at the age of 2, 3, or 4. And so I want us to understand that those beliefs are in our bodies, are in our minds. We believe that there are people who deserve to be disposed of. And so to me, abolitionist teaching is that every single move we make, every single book we teach, every single way we be, every single, thing that we say to a child is always communicating a model that life is precious, that we need to take care of each other, and that there is never a time when we're going to throw somebody away.
Thank you. And Marylin?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to reiterate, of course, my deep, deep gratitude for being part of this conversation. I have been so excited since Farima asked me to be on this panel, just to have this conversation, y'all, and to have this conversation in front of so many lives and to be able to touch folks in this way is honest. It's an honor, and I consider it a blessing. So thank you. And thank you for having a classroom teacher on the panel. Thank you for representing teachers. I think that is really important. I think we are experiencing classroom teachers, educators all over are experiencing a really, really unique time that we have never seen before. And so it's important that our voices are here and represented as well. When I think of abolitionist teaching, I think of Black freedom fighters in this country. I think of Assata Shakur. I think of Umi Abu Jamal. I think of folks who have been put away simply for fighting for their freedom. And so when I think about those folks and I think about the work that they must have done, not just with the systems that we need to abolish, but the systems and structures in their lives, the systems and structures within themselves that still live, right? And so for me, when I think about abolitionist teaching, I think about looking within yourself, looking around you, and also looking beyond you, and making a lifetime commitment to working to abolish all the areas and systems in your life that are colonized and oppressive practices, right? And so when I think about that, I think about your relationships. How are you decolonizing your relationships? How are you abolishing oppressive practices in your relationships? How are you doing that work within your workplace, right? Are you in your workplace disrupting those systems? Or are you in your workplace staying silent? Are you in your workplace in a place of comfort? Are you in your workplace not speaking up or not protecting or not supporting the voices of Black, Indigenous, Brown, people of color, critical educators that are speaking up in your workplace? I think about you doing the work in your homes. I think about the work that I've done in my home. And when I say home, I mean my home as in my home, my physical home, and me and my partner who live here. I think about my home back home in New Jersey, where I'm from, my family. I think about the home that I build and co-create with my students, right? How are we dismantling all of these systems within all of these contexts, within your own ideology? How are you decolonizing time within your life, right? And so for me, that's what that means. And it has been a lifelong commitment and a process of really understanding and honoring 7 generations that have come before me, the 7 generations that will come after me, and honoring that process of what that looks like to know who you are, to know where you come from, so that you can know where you're going, so that you can be present, and so that your spirit is not murdered by these institutions. I love how Dr. Bettina Love talks about spirit murdering in schools, because they are spirit murdering institutions. And so how are you feeding your spirit, right? And how are you feeding your spirit so that you can show up to feed the spirit of your students and your children that are literally looking up at you for answers and are looking up at you to model what it means to abolish these systems? And so I just want to quickly name what that kind of looked like for me during this transition of everything that was happening between COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives. For me in the classroom, I'm teaching first grade this year for the first time, and it was a really difficult transition, I know, for all of us. But what I want to name is that day 1 of the quarantine, day 1 of shelter in place, where I had to quote unquote work from home, I decided that I absolutely would not participate in anything that was promoting business as usual. I remember that first day of teaching from home. It was the most stressful thing ever. It was, and I think what made it so stressful was the fact that these systems were now entering my home, my sacred space, my space that I come to for refuge, my space that I come to for healing, right? My space that I come to fill my spirit so that I could show up for my kids. And so it may sound like counterproductive, but I made a schedule. I made a schedule to resist all of that business as usual. And that schedule prioritized prayer. It prioritized my morning routine. It prioritized body movement and yoga. It prioritized praise and worship. It prioritized family calls and checking in with loved ones. And it prioritized checking in with my students and their families and doing one-on-one check-ins to really, really be sure what their needs were and really to be sure that they were safe, right? Because everything in the system told me not to do all that. Everything in the system told me to just go on business as usual. Whatever you were doing in your classroom, you could just do it on Google Classroom now. You could just do it on Zoom now. And that's not how it works. That is not how it works. And teachers were in fact being praised. We're being praised for being able to make this transition. And for me, trust me, I was praising teachers because teachers are amazing. We're incredible human beings. We make magic happen, like for real. And I was also sitting back like, I will not allow this to be my story this school year, teaching first grade, right? Like, I will not allow this to be the interaction that I have with my students. And so I took the first 4 weeks of the quarantine to just simply sit with myself and sit with my students and sit with my families and figure out what the hell we were going to do. And that took a lot. It took a lot of resistance. It took a lot of having to speak up and name it. It took a lot of me having to just set my boundaries and saying no to certain meetings, certain staff meetings, saying no to certain Zoom calls. I was like, no, I can't show up for that. My priority is here. And so it's also about shifting your priorities and making sure that your priorities are not perverted by being caught up in those systems. You have to make sure that your priorities are with the liberation of Black and Brown children. And I think that that's what I want to name is also just the everyday practice, those every little small decisions that you're making on a daily basis. That is also abolitionist teaching.
Thank you. And Sagnicthe?
Yeah, just like everybody else, just want to give thanks for all of you who are hosting, jumping onto this call, all of you as panelists, and want to give thanks to Creator for another day of life, for letting us be here, for all the freedom fighters that came before us, that laid the ground for us to be able to still be doing this work and be able to do this work. Oftentimes, I think in a way where on a day-to-day, usually we're not getting shot and killed at, right? And we get to talk about abolition, we get to resist in a different way. So give thanks for all those folks who did put their life on the line on a daily basis for us to be able to do this work today. Super honored to be here with all of you. And the times are super dire right now, as they always are, right? But I think that this is definitely a blessing for us to be able to be in the space to have this conversation in these moments. And so I'll talk a little bit about what abolitionist education means to me, and I'll just echo what Bettina Love said in terms of breaking the system. I think that part of our job as abolitionist educators is to break the system that is working perfectly well as a tentacle of imperialism that needs the prison industrial complex, right? And so our job is to break that system and to break the hegemonic notion that Black and brown bodies, that they naturally are inclined to crime, that they're naturally inclined to violence, to devalue education, to have engage in activities that make a need for cops, for prisons, for militarized policing, for detention centers. We need to break the notion that the reason that those exist is because of how we are as humans. The reason that those exist is to profit this imperialist system. And once we break that notion, we need to begin to ask the question as a school system, as educators, with our kids, with our families, safety from what, for who, right? Education towards what end, and really start talking about how do we keep our folks safe from poverty? How do we keep our folks safe from houselessness, joblessness, from food deserts, from the perpetual stress that our folks live in on a day-to-day basis with these helicopters and, having to fight for something that is a human right. So begin to actually talk about how do we actually create safety around those things, and to begin to build the thread of there's a reason why there's so many Black and brown folks in these encampments, homeless encampments, right? There's a reason why our numbers are so high in the prisons. There's a reason why the number of Black and brown bodies being killed is so high by police terror. There's a reason why these white supremacists feel like they can march down the street feeling all fine and dandy, and our folks can't just breathe, right? Begin to build a thread between those things so that we begin to think about how do we actually, one, heal from those things, because we, as Marylin mentioned, like, we can't do business as usual, not because of COVID, but because this reality has impacted our bodies for hundreds of years, has impacted us generationally. And so we need to be able to actually talk about what's happening with our children, with our teachers, take a pause and actually engage around what is happening, be able to have a conversation with each other about our material conditions, and think about, I feel like, dream about what does it mean to have a world without police, without prisons? And we need to do that, especially with our children, because oftentimes, because the education system has worked so goddamn well, a lot of times our babies, our families, our folks tend to be the most punitive people, because we've internalized the state line, and we have internalized that we need to hurt people that hurt us. We need to punish them. And oftentimes when we engage with our children around what do we do when someone breaks a class agreement, or what do we do when someone gets into a fight, they'll be the first to say suspend them, expel them, all these things, because we haven't given our children, our families, our communities an opportunity to dream of something different. And so if that's all you know, then you can't begin to do the work to build something else, right? And so first and foremost, we need to create the space to say, it is possible. Let's dream of how it's possible, right? And a big piece of this work, I think, I believe Carla, you mentioned is, or I forget who mentioned it, but someone mentioned, trying to give credit here, is doing the internal work, right? I know that there's a lot of folks in the Bay Area in social justice schools that are trying to not have cops in schools, not have security guards engage in schools, not have, JROTC in schools. And so they're doing the work of the overt work of not having the state, the prison state in our schools, but they're not doing the covert work of actually dismantling the many ways in which they devalue humans, they devalue children, and that they perpetuate isolation, punishment, and the fact that that you can make someone disposable, right? And so part of the work is also being able to look at our systems and practices and actually have focus groups with children, have focus groups with families to talk about how are we replicating these systems and how do we shift those systems to actually humanize bodies within our building. So the work is all around for every warm body in the building, from teachers to students to families to administrators, to do the deep work within of how do we shift our thought process so that we actually value life and that we breathe life in the building through our practices, right? And part of that is actually looking at one of the things that we do at our school is every time that we look at our data, we look at the racial disproportionality and whether the numbers in our school match race-wise when it comes to whether it's like discipline issues or the success rate, right? Is it proportional that the number of students that are having discipline issues, is it proportional with our population, right? And oftentimes we see that that's not the case. So we got to go back to the drawing board and think about and question, how are we replicating the system? How are we not valuing life? And how can we breathe life through the systems that we have on a day-to-day, right? And one of the things that I want to say in my particular role as a dean of discipline, my particular role is a dean of transformative discipline, right? And so one of the things that I like to share with folks is part of it is having super high expectations because our children, our communities have infinite capacity, and if we have high expectations, they will meet it. And so we need to have high expectations and also zero tolerance for hurting each other. But part of that zero tolerance means that we need to hold a high line of like a line that leads towards love, towards care, towards compassion. And when a student or an adult kind of goes past that line, how do we actually walk with them with support? How do we actually bring that love and care that we want them to reverberate in the building? And how do we have consistent practices to show each other how do we want people to relate to each other on a day-to-day so that when they're outside the school walls, that they're relating to each other in a way where love reverberates, right? And that we don't need a particular rule or some sort of structure to tell us that we need to be kind to another, that we need to love each other, that we need to hold each other up, right? And so part of our practices need to be that, is to have zero tolerance for hurting each other through showing consistent, intense love and life for each other.
Thank you. And Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I want to echo the gratitude that everyone's been sharing in this group. I want to share gratitude to the folks who texted me before this call and were pumping me up and getting me emotionally and spiritually ready for this call. I want to continue talking about this idea of spirit murdering, and a particular kind of spirit murdering that happens in our schools. And I learned this term disembodiment from a queer Black Zen Buddhist monk named Lama Rod Owen. And some of you might be familiar with his work. But he basically talks about disembodiment as this idea of, in practice and system of rejecting, removing, and delegitimizing wisdom in our bodies. And whether that is the fear of not feeling safe, or whether that's the righteous rage that you carry from not having your needs met on a daily basis, or from grieving loss and not being able to actually show that, right? And so I want to talk about, like, how do we actually harness the power of feelings, of emotions that our students carry into the classroom, and use it for transformation. And so I'm not talking about the kind of social emotional learning that is actually quite manipulative. It's gaslighting. It's a form of, like, okay, let's get our kids to tap into their emotions, name them. And then now that you've named them, now let's move on to the real work of doing curriculum or whatever. And what it really is about manipulating young people's emotions in order to be compliant, in order to have order, in order to not question the very real conditions that our young people already know how to question, right? And so I think my question to all of us, and the ways that I've been trying to do it in my own practice, is how do we, one, like Marylin was saying, like, get to know ourselves well, be in relationship with ourselves and our own emotions. And then from that place, how do we help our young people name them? And how do we help them name them in a way that is with so much empathy and so much compassion for the ways that a lot of those emotions and our coping mechanisms, or whatever you want to call them, have really protected us and really allowed us to survive? And unpacking those in ways that help us show that there are other strategies that we can use to meet our needs, right? And also showing that these very real feelings of grief and sadness and anger and anxiety and fear and joy, these are not just individual feelings. These are things that have collectively we felt through our ancestors, through our lineage, through the people that we're trying to build coalition with. And so I want to build off of what Marylin was saying in terms of what are you doing, or what are we doing in our classrooms to actually tap into those emotions, to name them, to not move them so quickly so that, you know, we need to get to the quote unquote real stuff. How do we also not get stuck there? How do we do it responsibly? There's a lot of responsibility and care that it takes to actually hold and create a container for our young people's emotions. How do we deal with the discomfort of it? How do we not move into savior complex and wanting to put it all in these like tidy little boxes, right? How do we get comfortable with the messiness? And so I think those are the big questions that we have in this moment. And then I think it's from that place that we can start thinking about our curriculum, because, you know, math brings up emotions in people. History brings up emotions in people. And those are the ways that you can genuinely and authentically connect what you're teaching to what students are feeling, right? Because as I've learned from my best teachers, including my kids, including Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa, and Dignity and Power Now, which is a collective in LA that works with Black Lives Matter here, is that, you know, oppression impacts us on multiple levels, and we have to also target the level in which it's embodied in us, right? And so how do we channel those emotions? How do we work with them with precision, right? Audre Lorde talks a lot about how there's so many furies and so much anger that is sitting in our bodies, in our collective bodies. And sometimes we don't know where to put it. But I think that's the work, right? Figuring out where do we put it in ways that do not continue harm, that do not, like Carla said, make us look at people as if they're disposable because we can't deal with their feelings, right? And so that's the kind of abolition work that I'm interested in doing in my own work.
Let me just say, y'all are just such a blessing to all of us right now. What I'm hearing, I just want to make some through lines here. As Bettina started out, there's levels to this, right? There's levels. And so from this conversation, each of you highlighted so many different levels, but let's just package it up into the 4 eyes of oppression, right? We're talking about ideological oppression, dismantle that. Let's talk about internalized oppression. Let's dismantle that. Let's talk about interpersonal oppression. How do we really think about abolishing violence within those relationships? And then also institutional. So y'all got work. We have so many ways that we can enter into this conversation on how we can dismantle these things. But what I'm also hearing you say is that, yes, you know, dismantle, but we got to create some shit too. right? And so as we're dismantling, what is our vision for justice? What is our vision for liberation? And how are we also creating spaces to really manifest those things and practice those things in our relationships, in our collaborations, in the spaces that we're occupying? Beautiful. Thank y'all for bringing those pieces together. I also want to name that each of you occupy such different positionalities when we're talking about education. We got teacher educators here. We got administrators here. We got, dean of discipline. We have classroom educators. We got healers, right? And so all of us have a role in this. We have very unique.
And mothers, I want to add too.
And mothers and aunties, the work happening at home. Thank you, Steph. Like, such an important reminder. Partners, right? How are we abolishing the ways that we punish one another, even in the most intimate spaces we occupy? Yo, don't get me started. Okay, what I want to say is, in this moment, we have a 1,500 folks on Facebook right now who are commenting, who are asking questions, who are really engaged. We have 4,500 folks on YouTube, and we got a whole lot of other folks on Zoom. And so in this moment, I want to ask you all, we don't have a lot of time left. So we will have to kind of limit our answers to this question. If we go a little over, y'all, I'm so sorry, but I'm not sorry. Right? I'm sorry for the panelists, because I know y'all are working hard and you deserve rest, including myself. I can't wait to take a nap. But what I will say is this conversation is so important. And so with this last question, I just want to name, we're navigating a global pandemic as we're also continuing to navigate the structural that our communities face, and in particular, fighting for Black lives to matter, right? And so in this moment, as we're witnessing these uprisings, notice I riot is apolitical in this conversation. We want to center the truth, and these uprisings are in response to the violence. People are saying no more. And so in this moment, when you think about educators, what do you see as the possibilities in this moment for educators? What do you see as potential challenges? Yes, there are many challenges, but most importantly, what are the possibilities that we have in this moment as we think about teaching at all of those levels? And so I'm going to start with Sagnicthe.
Thank you, Farima, for connecting all those dots. So like you said, there's many challenges, so I won't go into that, because I do believe that this moment is a portal, and it's our responsibility to walk through it, and I do believe that it is greener on the other side. So I'll talk about opportunities. And I think that one of the big opportunities is that this time of national uprising and global pandemic actually, it brought the disease and the virus out of the bag. And the disease and the virus is imperialism, white supremacy, and this colonial state, right? I think that this moment has elevated, exacerbated, and like really amplified the inequalities that we see, and the conditions that we see on a day-to-day. For Black and Brown folks, for communities of color, we know that our folks are most impacted by COVID because of the consistent conditions that we're living in that deteriorate our immune system on a day-to-day, right? And so I think one of the opportunities that I'm seeing with a lot of the teachers that I'm working with is that a lot of our teachers are actually coming back with a deeper understanding of the daily realities that our young people live, and the fact that as educators, we can't just move on to the curriculum and expect those realities to go away. Those realities were there before COVID. They're just exacerbated right now, right? And so it's really a moment for us to think about, how do we actually meet the needs that a grade and a particular lesson, unless the lesson is actually making them stronger, their spirit stronger, is making their mind stronger, is allowing them to have the ability to advocate for themselves, to build their leadership and their strength, that lesson ain't worth nothing for them. Right. And so there's an opportunity for teachers that are coming back with that newfound reality of the day-to-day conditions our young people are living in to actually question what they're bringing into the classroom and how they're stepping in, but also for our teachers to focus on the particular privilege that they have, and not only as white teachers, but as teachers of color. And even if you live in the hood, right, like as a teacher, you have more privilege than a lot of our families, simply because of your consistent paycheck and because of the resources that you have access to, right? And so how can we use our privilege in service of our families? So that's one thing. But the other thing, I think that there's an opportunity to pause. And a lot of you guys are talking about the work that needs to happen for healing that often is not valued by a lot of administrators, leadership. And so this is an opportunity for us to really take that time to pause for that, to actually process with our students, with our families, with our teachers, also with our teachers of color that are doing the consistent work and are constantly on the verge of burnout, to actually take that pause for self-healing, self-work, for that internal work that we need to do, right? And actually use that pause to begin to imagine what do we want to see on the other side, right? So that's an opportunity. And another, I think a big opportunity is that because of what's been happening with COVID, there's been a lot of mutual aid systems that have been created. And I think that this is something that as abolitionists, educators, we can replicate these systems within our schools, within our school community, so that we can actually begin training the skills for our teachers, for our families, for our students, so that we don't have the need for cops for safety, because we can keep each other safe. We have the skills within our community. We're super rich in terms of our ability to actually have each other's back and hold each other. And so these mutual aid models can be replicated within the schools in such a strong way to actually make cops irrelevant, because we can keep each other safe, right? I think that there was one, just the last thing that I want to say is that this is an opportunity for us to push beyond the self-care to the self-work, right? And the work of really questioning, using that pause to use professional development time and structural time to have teachers do the self-work of questioning how are they replicating the system. I'll leave it at that, because I'm sure you guys all have amazing opportunities to share.
Fire. So I'm gonna ask Marylin, can you follow that up, sis?
That's right. I'm gonna just build on that. I'm not just gonna try to reinvent the wheel. That was so beautifully said. But I do want to name, particularly during these uprisings, I've been feeling so many mixed emotions. Like my emotions have been so up and down, as many of us have been experiencing as well. And I think, it was this process of just like witnessing people really standing up, really speaking out. Folks who haven't shared their voices before are sharing their voices now. Family members of mine are sharing their voices in ways that I've never seen before. People in my community, people back home, right? And so I started feeling a lot of hope around that. And then when folks went out on the street, I witnessed, I saw a lot of white folks, and I was like, all right, like, let's go, right? It's time. And then like immediately after, we got the information that some of those white folks were infiltrators, right? We're actually busting open Black-owned businesses, busting open brown-owned businesses, right? And so it's gone back. Then I'm seeing my Latinx brothers and sisters out here, folks out here really represent. And then the next thing I see an anti-Black comment by a Latinx person, a non-Black Latinx person, right? So it was just like every second, every minute, it seemed like my emotions were just going up and down, hope and like, oh man, discouragement, right? And so I think I want to name that messiness, that chaos and that messiness of our emotions and our feelings and how we are experiencing this is actually an experience of healing, right? And that is an opportunity. I want to name that as an opportunity, because I know the messiness hurts. I know it's painful. I know those cause painful conversations. I know that causes painful trauma, right? And I also want to name that it is an opportunity for spiritual growth. And so I want to name that it's time to heal our homes. I think that's a huge one. Starting with the shelter in place, right away, I noticed, I said, wow, the Creator wants us to work on our homes, wants us to work on healing our homes, wants us to work on those relationships, healing those relationships, prioritizing those relationships. I have had the honor and privilege to have the most beautiful conversations with my fiance, Lauren, during this time. We have never had this much time together, ever. We're both teachers, we're both educators. So this time has been precious for us, right? And so those are opportunities, those little moments and those little blessings that we often overlook, those are opportunities. Dr. Ginwright names it as we experience persistent traumatic stress environment, right? As opposed to saying PTSD, it's actually persistent. And it's an environment that is constantly happening to us and impacting us. And so because trauma is persistent, our healing also has to be relentless and persistent, right? Like, and so I want to name that because, as I said earlier, it is a lifetime commitment, right? And so if you are a classroom teacher and you think that closing the achievement gap is equity and justice, and you think that that is abolitionist teaching, it's not, right? You need to interrogate that. You need to interrogate where that comes from. If you think getting immigrant and Black and brown children to achieve the American dream is justice work, you're wrong. And you need to interrogate your assimilationist ideologies, right? If you want to be a co-conspirator, show it, show up and show out. This is the time, right? And we have 85% of the teacher workforce, but Farima always reminds me of this statistic. Every time we have a conversation, even when we're just chopping it up, right? She reminds me of this statistic. Is it 85, sis, or 83?
Sis, that would be 83.
83. Okay, I'm sorry, my bad, sis. She got it though. She got the statistic, right? 83% of the teacher workforce is white. What would it mean to take all those bodies and put them on the front lines? What would it mean to train all those bodies and put them on the front lines, in the forefront of the struggle for the liberation of Black lives, right? What would it mean to take all those bodies and put them at the border to stop ICE from deporting and caging our children? What would that mean? What would that mean? What would that look like, right? And so if you are willing to put your body on the line, do it. Another thing I want to name is, are you willing to put your job on the line? Your job is tied to an anti-Black, racist, capitalist system. Are you willing to put your job on the line? Now, I want to recognize and acknowledge that I am coming from a place of privilege when I say that. I have put my job on the line at every single school that I have been at since day one. And I also want to acknowledge I don't have kids. I don't have any dependents. Right? And so I acknowledge that. And I also want to name that it actually, abolitionist teaching takes that, right? It takes you being willing to put your job on the line to show up for our Black and brown babies. So to my non-Black Latinx family, right? We need to heal and we need to make a lifetime commitment of unlearning anti-Blackness and also organizing to dismantle anti-Blackness in our communities, right? If you are on the streets today screaming Black Lives Matter, are you still going to be having these difficult ass conversations with family members 5 years from now when people aren't saying George Floyd's name anymore? Are you still going to be having these conversations? Are you still going to put your job on the line 5 years from now? Are you still going to be showing up and showing out for Black and brown people, right? And I know this is difficult work, y'all. This is difficult work. It is not easy. And it is the work that folks are calling for right now, right? And if you are a non-Black person and you are a classroom teacher, a non-Black POC, you need to be teaching Black history. You need to be teaching freedom fighters. You need to be teaching Black freedom fighters. Are you talking about police brutality in your classrooms? Are you talking about the counterintelligence program that targeted Black freedom fighters in this country in your classroom? Because that is dismantling the system. They don't want you to talk about that. Are you doing that work? Right? Are you using that bravery and courage and spirit inside of you that I know is inside of you to do this work? Right? So I want to probe those questions to get your spirit stirred up so that you recognize that there are tangible things that we can be doing at any moment in any given time, but it does require that inner work so that your spirit is well enough to show up and show out when it's being called on.
You know, y'all, I got to do another I'm sorry, but not sorry. I'm sorry y'all thought you were coming to a panel conversation. I'm not sorry y'all are getting church right now. I can assure you many folks were not ready for this conversation. Thank you for your words, Marylin. It also makes me think about the read aloud that you made for your elementary students about COINTELPRO. I mean, we got to create, y'all. When I said we got to create some shit, I really meant it. We got to create. I'm thinking about Akia Gross and their woke kindergarten. We got to create. If the materials are not there to teach abolition, then we create them. And we do it in community. We don't do it alone because we need folks to hold us accountable if you are not Black and if you are not understanding what anti-prison industrial complex work is, right? Okay, sorry. So now we're going to go ahead and give it to my sis, Steph. What do you have for us, sis? Possibilities.
So I'm going to build off of what folks are saying in terms of the inner work and what it's looking like at home in this time. I'm going to tell you a little story within the time frame as much as possible. There was this one time where, I don't know, we were in like quarantine week 8 or some shit like that. And my 3-year-old was doing his 3-year-old thing, and I could feel the anger and the resentment and all the things building up in me. And it took me a moment to be like, okay, I need to walk away. And so I walked away, I hit my door, I hit my wall, and then I punched a big ass hole in my wall and didn't realize how strong I was, one. And then 2, all of a sudden, this whole cloud of shame came across me. And I was looking for alibis. I was looking for things to cover it up. I was looking for ways that, you know, eventually it got to the point where my husband, Patrick, was asking the kids if they did it. And I was almost ready to let them like take the heat for me. Like the shame was like that deep. And we laugh about that story. And it's been like a transformative story for our family at home. But I also want to be serious also about the ways that we are so uncomfortable with anger. Like for me, I'll speak from my own experience, is that I have been conditioned intergenerationally, collectively, to be ashamed of my anger, to the point where I'm learning ways to not place it onto my kids, but then I'm not having an outlet to actually express it. So it becomes internalized as shame. And so what I want to invite folks to think about, especially that we have so much more time with ourselves and with our families, is how do we sit with that discomfort? How do we get intimate with it? How do we build relationship with the anger, the very real angers that we have? And some angers are not righteous, right? And so we have to also figure out what is underneath that anger? What is the root of it? Where does it come from? I me connect.
It looks like you froze, sis.
And so can you hear me?
Now we can, but you might want to run back your last comment.
So I was saying that I've been having these conversations with my dad, and he told me about all these ways in which my grandmother on my dad's side, Mary Cariaga, has carried a lot of anger around coming from the Philippines to here and wanting to go back, but not being able to go back, right? And not having a place to express that. And so how do I take care of my anger? How do I befriend it? How do I witness it so that I am comfortable with the discomfort of it, so that I can then be a better ally or co-conspirator to be in solidarity with the very real, righteous, collective, historical, ancestral rage that has begun since the inception of this country, right? So when I see folks using different strategies to express their rage on a collective level, how do I do that inner work so that I can have compassion for my own anger, so I can have compassion for my students' anger, for my children, if I have children, for my partners, so that then from that place, I can be in better solidarity with folks to transform this world.
Thank you for that powerful example. I'm sure so many of us have had moments of breakout or breakdown and shame. And so what does it mean to reckon with that, right? The full range of our humanity, because that's essentially abolitionist work too, is to reckon with the full range of everything that is going on within us. So thank you, sis. I'm gonna ask Carla, what do you see as possibilities in this moment?
So I think a lot of things got covered, so I will cut right to only the things that haven't. I'm so grateful for everyone that came before. So I have been thinking about this moment in terms of where's the abolition lesson that we can teach our youngest kids, right, in this moment. And to me, there's the very obvious one during the pandemic, which I think also has a lot to do with the uprisings also. And for me, the lesson that we can be teaching kids right now is that it's our collective responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us. That if we operated that way at all times, we wouldn't have lost the lives that we've lost. We wouldn't have the classrooms that we have now. Right? And I'm watching around me the failure in that lesson. right? That when people protest because they can't get their hair cut, right? When kids are refusing to wear their mask because their parents are like, you need the mask to protect, to protect yourself. What I'm hoping and begging educators at all levels to do, including, mothers, people at home raising kids, that we teach kids that you wear the mask to protect other people, right? That you wear the mask, that it's hot and it's summer and it's gross and you can smell your own breath, all the things, right? Like we can sit with the anger about it. We can have all the feelings that we have, but you wear the mask because you are protecting other people, not yourself. And that the lesson always be that every single day at home, every single day in classrooms, and like Marylin was saying before, it's like every little decision, it's like everything about how you be is always a model of we are going to protect the most vulnerable among us. And we are not going to fail in that. And when we fail in that, we're going to come together. We're going to figure out how have we failed in that, right? And that the idea be that if we actually identified the most vulnerable and we served that person, the rest of our needs would actually be met, right? And so I see parents struggle with this all the time, that, your kid's not having the birthday party this year. So you have the 3 or the 4-year-old and they're devastated, right? They're not going to have the birthday party. And there are so many different kinds of ways that you can talk to your kid about skipping the birthday party that year. You can say to your kid, we can't have the birthday party because the governor has us on lockdown. We'll have the birthday party later. You can say that, or you can say, we're not having the birthday party because it's going to be dangerous to everybody who comes. And your birthday is not, your birthday party is not more important than the lives of the people who are coming to your birthday party. We want them to have birthdays too, right? That there's a lesson there repeatedly that when you're teaching people to take care of the most vulnerable among you, you're going to have to make sacrifices, right? So I was listening to the rest of you. I heard Bettina say, like, people are going to have to be willing to destroy a system that benefits them. I hear Marylin asking, are you willing to put your job on the line? You're not going to have adults who are willing to do that unless you have children who understand that their birthday party is not more important than other people getting to have a birthday, right, at all. And so this is why I hate when people dismiss young children in abolition work. I hate it because young children have to start learning from the very beginning. Look, you are only as important as the person next to you. You are not more important. You are not worth more, right? And that, people, I think, sometimes mistake abolitionist teaching. It's for Black kids in Black schools. It is for Black people, but it is also in white schools because it's white kids who repeatedly are getting the message that they are more important, that they are more represented, that everything about how they are is normal and right? Like they're going to see 700 books of themselves and dogs by the time they're in 3rd grade before they see a book with one picture of one Black person in it. So they're getting so many lessons in never having to sacrifice anything to take care of the most vulnerable among us, that it takes double work in white schools. It takes double work in white teachers because you're not just teaching, you're unteaching. You're getting them to notice. You're getting a lot of messages that you are super important, and you are. You're very special, but you're not more special than the kid sitting next to you. And that kid doesn't deserve any worse or any less than you get, right? And so every single way that we send this messaging to young children, that's abolition work, right? It's abolitionist work. And that's why we need that to start, in families. We need that. You're always looking for every opportunity to orient kids away from themselves and toward not just other people. You don't just say, well, we have to protect grandma and grandpa. No, it's not just your grandma and grandpa. It's so-and-so's father who has a chronic illness, who's not an old person, but who's sick, right? You're not coming to our house for that reason, right? It's just that to me is, I know that it sounds small, but I want everybody to leave feeling like I can do some bit of abolitionist teaching. And you can do that if you stay on message that it is our job collectively to take care of the most vulnerable among us, that they be the most important, and that we drive every decision by what's going to serve them. And so this is the last thing I'll say, but it's related, and Asante raised it already, around mutual aid. During COVID, there have been a lot of things where suddenly the most vulnerable among us are actually getting the services they've always deserved, right? So here in Detroit, for example, we have water shutoffs, right? Imagine people not having running water. And so now those people were starting to restore their water because it's a pandemic and we want people to wash their hands. first, and they don't have water in their house and haven't had water in their homes for years, right? That's been allowed. That's been acceptable. This is what I mean about how regular this idea of throwaway lives is, right? You don't put running water in houses where there are children. That's how strongly we accept the fact of throwaway lives. But now some of those services are coming back, not because we care about the people living in those houses, but because we don't want them out in the world without their hands washed. So 2 lessons here, right? One, you know, this lesson in ethnic studies around NLACS, trying to help kids understand, like, if I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. There's actually literal examples, right? If I cut your water off and you can't wash your hands, now you're out in the world without your hands washed. And so kids can understand that a little more concretely. And so why have we always needed to worry about them having water in their houses? Because they're human beings and they need to have water in their houses, and we need to take care of the most vulnerable among us. And if we don't, guess what? It's going to come for you. So even if you still want to be selfish, it's coming for you if you don't take care of these people, right? So we're starting to have water again. We're starting to give people internet access. We're starting to get devices into kids' hands. We're starting to worry about whether people have food. I hope that doesn't all disappear after this. And to me, the way it doesn't disappear after this is that we make intentional decisions to teach our children, look at what's happening, right? People are getting their water back. Let's look at the organizations that have been fighting for that years before the pandemic. And I'm sorry, but we'll be fighting for it years after the pandemic. And then when you get yourself involved in that as a mother, as a parent, as a caretaker, also as a teacher, then you model for children what it actually looks like to take care of the most vulnerable among us. So you're not just talking about it in school, but you're giving your money, if nothing else. It's okay to stay home and give your money out. That's great. Do that. That's actually the best course of action for a lot of people. You stay home, cover your mouth, protect everybody else, and just send your money out into the world to the people who've been doing this work for the most vulnerable among us the whole time. Do that. That's good. You know, teach your kids that you're doing that. So I just want to carry forth the idea that, again, you know, the opposite of a throwaway person is to say, let's actually make it our business to take care of each other. And that kids, and young kids especially, are very good at it. They're very good at it, and they can build the kind of future that we need because it comes very naturally to them to want to actually love and take care of each other.
Thank you so much, Carla. It's making me think about all of your comments right now, just along the lines of like all these police officers, 45, all of them were kids one day. You know, at one point they were kids. And so what if they were raised to see the humanity in everyone in the ways that you all are talking about? And so I really appreciate that. So I'm just ask folks, wherever you are, give a little drum roll, because we got Dr. Bettina Love to close us out. Dr. Bettina Love, what do you see as possibilities?
What do I see as possibilities? I think with everything that everyone's been said, it's hard to try to figure out like what's next, because everyone on this panel is goddamn brilliant and have said so much. So I want to just focus us back to the idea that abolitionist teaching is also about joy. It's also about love. It's also about knowing who you are. And so we have the possibility to restore love, to restore joy. And so that means is that when you walk into these classrooms and you want to talk to these kids about what's going on, you want to talk about Minnesota, you want to talk about Breonna Taylor, you want to talk about Nina Pop, all that is great. But you better know our joy. You better know Black people's joy, our resilience, who we are, what we have done. Because if that, you're just telling half the story and you are dehumanizing us, and that is also anti-Black. And so I want to tell a quick story. I got a chance in 2018 to go to Ghana with the one and only Cynthia Dillard. If you don't know the work of Dr. Cynthia Dillard, she is a Black woman that shows you how to do this work here and across the water. She has dedicated her life to thinking about what it means to be Black and to be African, and to bring those identities together in one to heal. And I got a chance to go to Ghana with Dr. Dillard in 2018, and she drove us up through the Kumasi. We got to the last river, and to learn that my ancestors walked 250 miles in shackles to the last river. And I got to the last river, and the tour guide said, well, do you know what's in that water? And I'm at the last river, and it's December, so it's low season, so I can go into the water. And I said, is that what I think it is? He said, yeah. I said, that's gold? He said, yeah, that's gold. Gold comes in a black rock. And the bottom of this river where enslaved Africans took their last bath is nothing but gold. And then they walked 34 miles after that to the coast to spend 12 weeks in what they call a castle, but is nothing but a dungeon. And then after that's 250 miles, last bath in gold, 34 miles, 12 weeks in a dungeon. Then they took another 12 weeks to live a life of bondage. And I know that somebody in my DNA did that for me. We talk all the time about who died for us, but we don't talk about who lived for us. And so when you know that about where you come from, can't nobody tell you shit. So the conversation has to be so much about telling our babies who they are, where they come from, why they are strong, why they are beautiful, why they are unique, why they have resistance, why they have this damn grit. It comes from something. It comes from who they are. So you got to tell the full story. And if you say to yourself, well, I don't know the full story, why not? You know everybody else's story. You can study all of the religions. You can study all of the culture. You can study all of the languages. Why can't you study us? Because studying us hurts because it implicates you. So the conversation has to be not just to talk about our pain, not just to talk about what we have gone through. Don't give these kids narrative after narrative after narrative about our destruction, and then don't implicate who has done that to us. And so when we say we are dismantling white supremacy, when we say we are anti-Black, that means we are going to do with the erasure of trying to erase us from history. So this is an opportunity to think about the possibilities of centering Black lives. And I also want to say it's an opportunity to think about the possibilities of centering us at all our intersections. So tell us not only about Black folks, but Black queer folks. Tell about Black folks with disabilities. Tell about Black folks and Black women. Tell about all of us. So it's not just about to tell about the heroes that you know in a book, it's to tell about the real lives of Black folks who put work in. And the last thing that I will say is that if you are watching and you want to know what to do, it's about queer Black women. It's about queer Black women of color. We have led these movements. We are always in these movements. So trust us. Trust women of color. Trust what we tell you. Trust how we move in this world. Watch how we move in this world. Watch how we build families. Watch how we build communities. Watch how we love. That is what we have to be doing at this moment, is learning from the folks who have given us a playbook of how to be radical, and also how to love at the exact same time. Because at the end of the day, dismantling everything that we're talking about doing is going to take time. Dismantling is going to take time. Reshaping the way people think about the world is going to take time. And so I may not see it in my lifetime. But what I know I can see in my lifetime is unbelievable love and unbelievable joy for what it means to be Black. And you got to instill that in children. Because the hope and the joy has to come within. And so that's what it means to be an abolitionist, not just to focus on what we can't do, not just to focus on changing the system. Yes, that is important, but it's so much we can do. And the first place that starts is young folk knowing that being Black is beautiful. I don't care what they see on TV right now. Being Black is absolutely beautiful, and it's the biggest gift the Creator has ever given me. And I'm grateful for it every single day. And you got to instill that. And as my mother would say, you give them hell. You give them absolute hell in this world. And that means you don't bite your tongue for nobody. That means you make strategic moves about how you be an abolitionist teacher. But it also means that you give this world hell. And you go to sleep at night knowing that you gave this world hell. Because I don't know how some of y'all sleep at night. So make sure the work is about joy. Make sure that the work is intersectional. And make sure that Black kids know the beauty of who they are. It's also about the possibilities of what's next. Because what's next could be right around the corner. if we knew who we were and how beautiful we are. That's the freedom work. Because we may not see what's next. We may not get there. I may not get there. People on this panel, this thing could be an 80-year project. But the idea has to be that I'm going to have a revolutionary space right up here. And I'm going to give that to kids in every single way they can. And that's what our classroom has to be. Spaces of resistance, spaces of love, spaces of joy, spaces of healing. And we gotta welcome healers into our schools. People that can heal. That has to be a part of our schools. So we have to think about what we can do right now, and what we can do is heal. What we can do is find love, and what we can do is find joy, and what we can do is make sure we don't teach just the trauma, that we teach the pain, we teach the love, we teach the joy, we teach the resistance equally, and tell our full story of our humanity, because that's what makes Black people beautiful, and that's what makes us human, is when you tell our full story.
Thank you all so much. This is all just so beautiful, and just really appreciate all of you. So we are coming up against our time together. So Farima and we're going to do a lightning round is our plan. So as fast as lightning. And we're going to do, so there's been a lot of questions and comments that have been coming through in the comment sections on Facebook and YouTube, really asking around resources. So we're going to do a lightning round of asking for you all to share what are like one or two of the resources that you would really like to share in this moment. I'd also like to say that we're going to be gathering the different authors that have been mentioned on this call. We'll put all that together and we will send that out with a recording of this event as well. And also just wanted to remind everyone that in 2021, Lessons in Liberation is going to be out, and that is going to have a ton of resources from educators and organizers around the nation. So, I'm talking a little bit to try to give folks time to scheme what your lightning round resource is going to be right now. But we're going to go ahead and start off with Marylin, and then we're going to go to Sagnicthe.
I'll try to be quick, y'all. So our number one resource, I want to name our number one resource and our biggest resource right now is young people. I want to lift up two young people's names that have just been on my heart all week, which is Kalia Vernon, Farima's niece, who made, she has this poem, y'all. Go to Farima's Instagram or Facebook page and just watch her poem on ethnic studies. That is a resource in and of itself. And also my nephew, Anthony Waman, I want to name his name in this space as well, because he has been creating art this week. He has been creating portraits of George Floyd and for Black Lives Matter and for justice to be served. And he's using his gifts and his calling at the age of 13. And that's precisely what we need to be doing, is using our gifts and our calling, even as adults, right? And then the last couple of resources I want to name is, of course, read all autobiographies and biographies of the freedom fighters named on this call. I know Assata Shakur's autobiography. I read that every summer to remind me how I'm going to start the school year. I want to name The Soul of Black Folk as an album that you should listen to right after this call. You should listen to the entire thing and just sit with it and reflect if you haven't already. It's called The Soul of Black Folk, and it is by the band Soul Development. It is a beautiful, beautiful story and piece about Black liberation. And so I would encourage you to sit with that. And then the last piece was already named, of Woke Kindergarten. Akia Gross, our friend, they are just they are in their spirit and they are creating right now. And so I recommend their read alouds that are virtually available and for purchase right now.
Thank you. And Sagnicthe?
So I'll share 4 quick things that come to my mind. One is the book by Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy, as a book that really talks about some practices on how to put our values into action and how to learn from the biggest teacher in the world, which is Creator Mother Earth, right? and everything that surrounds us. So there's a lot of good both practices and teachings from that book that we can translate into the work of teachers and the work of in the classroom. Also, I feel like the work of Oakland Power Project and the practices that the Oakland Power Project as a project of critical resistance is doing. Before COVID, before a lot of folks started doing this mutual aid stuff, I think of resourcing our folks to both to be able to respond to each other in instances of need, and the practices of like just knowing your neighbor, knowing what folks have within our community so that we can actually depend and support each other on a day-to-day. I think the Oakland Power Project has some really good models to take from. Also, Movement Generations, a work of Just Transition. They're doing a lot of sessions right now, and they have a lot of good work that talks about how to actually create the world that we want to, that we vision. How do we do it today, right? And how do we use this moment of portal to like actually walk on the other side before we're actually there, right? How do we make sure that we don't go back to business as usual, but change the motherfucking shit now, right? And lastly, Carla, you reminded me of the work of Stacey Park and the disability justice culture memoirs that they're the work that they're putting together that really talks about how to center folks that are most vulnerable, and all the work that the disability justice folks are doing. I think some really good work around both mutual aid, but also how to make sure that on a day-to-day when we're walking, we're thinking about how do we not wait till someone is in need, but function as if we're creating space so that everyone is always included, right? Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And our last three in our order, so we can save a little time. So Bettina, Steph, and then Carla.
Okay, so I think really quickly, I'm not from the South, but I live here now and I call Atlanta home. And so, we can't forget about the South and the great work that folks in the South are doing. So Southerners on New Ground song, unbelievable organization. And really quickly, I want to shout out Charlene Carruthers' book. And I love this book because it's a guide of how to do abolitionist resistance work. But what she does is she says there's 5 questions that you have to answer. And the first question is, who am I? The second question is, who are my people? The third question is, what do we want? Fourth question is, what are we building? And the fifth question, can we win? And those are 5 questions that she poses in the book that you have to be asking yourself as you do this work. Who are you related to this work? Who are your people? Do you know who your people are? Are you in community with your people? What do you want? We can talk all day about, what we don't want, but what do we want? And this idea of, do we have the capacity to win? And so this is a book that I just go back to so much because it's also, it gives a history lesson, it gives language, but it also gives you a playbook to understand how you do movement work. And I also want to say, as someone who is a researcher. And I was talking with my good friend, Treva Lindsley about this the other day, is that, researchers are researchers. We're not organizers. And I want to be very clear about that. I couldn't be an organizer. And so you got to make sure that you are doing things that benefit the community with the tools that God gave you and the creator gave you. So we must be able to be using resources and helping folks, but stay in our lane. I'm going to turn to the organizers like Farima to get my marching orders. So we always have to make sure that we are trying to understand at best who we are and the tools that we have and how we can be in communication with each other, sharing our resources, using our resources to benefit Black liberation, rather than trying to be something that we're not because we got a book. So I stay in my lane. Farima, tell me where I need to be.
You really do be staying in your lane, but you stay in it so fly and you be connecting folks. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. And Stephanie?
I want to uplift your body as a resource. Like that's the most immediate resource you can go to. I want to uplift our relationships, the most immediate relationships that you have. I want to uplift the land, not in a transactional way, but like really taking this time to really build relationship with the land in a reciprocal way. And then thinking in terms of organizers, I'm really drawing inspiration from the healing justice movement. So look up healing justice. It's by way of Kara Page from the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective. Healing justice is also the framework that Black Lives Matter movement's work draws from and is framed by. If you look up Prentice Hemphill, there's an amazing article that I put in the resource page just defining what healing justice looks like. And then finally, a book called Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice by Leah Lakshmi Pyapsna Samarasimha. This is, it's really powerful work to draw from in this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And that resource document that Stephanie was just mentioning, we will be sending that out to everybody with the recording after the event. And Carla.
I will put resources in that document. And to save time now, I'll just echo where Marylin started us, that I think the greatest resource that we have in terms of doing abolitionist teaching in particular is kids, especially young kids. And then I think teachers often have the idea that they're going to be the ones, and you're not going to be the one. So you're not going to model and teach people how to take care of each other if all the authority and the power kind of always comes through you. It won't work. So you always have at your disposal the kids. And I will also say the kids' families, right? And the kids' communities, that is where the resources are. And that if you know all the books, even if you know all the community organizations, but you don't know how to listen to a mother who's coming at you every day, trying to get you to straighten yourself out as a teacher, those are your resources, because they know the most about what they need and what they need you to be. So I would say stop looking out, look at yourself, look at the kids that are right around you every single day, and seek out them as your greatest resource always.
Great, thank you. And Farima's going to close us out, but before we do that, I just wanted to say thank you to all the panelists, to all the folks who signed up, who are awaiting. I got a lot of emails from folks who were asking if there's going to be a recording because they're out protesting, and just really wanting to honor everybody who's both here live, but also will be here at a different moment, and definitely here in spirit. So what we'd like to ask is for you to go into the comment section of either YouTube or Facebook and write one next step that you're going to take based on the conversation that you've heard today. So we're asking everyone to write one step. And we also wanted to remind you all to please keep an eye out for Lessons in Liberation, an abolitionist toolkit for educators, which will be coming out with AK Press in 2021. And I'll hand it over to Farima. And again, thank you so much.
Y'all have been a whole blessing. You know, I have to be honest that this week was really heavy. And my prayer has been that as I cultivate the various spaces for healing, that I'm reminded by the brilliance that we all embody, to remember that we are not alone, to remember that this is a movement, it's not a moment. And I feel like this evening has done just that. I want to name, so Marylin had shared, you know, Marylin's other Bible is All About Love by Bell Hooks. And the quote that she reminds us of is, "Love is an act of will, both in intention and in action." Your intentions are great, but that's just half the story, y'all. What is the action looking like? Love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own and another's spiritual growth, because we know, y'all, this is a spiritual battle. This goes beyond, you know, the flesh. It goes beyond these systems. There's something so much deeper that is going on in this moment. And so how do we connect to that? And so I want to challenge us to really think about spirit as we think about abolishing and dismantling these systems and creating new ones. And also as a resource, for schools and school leaders who are thinking about trying to begin this conversation. I also want to point you to, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are doing consulting work, who are trying to make ends meet, and who have all the knowledge and brilliance necessary to have these conversations. And so I want to highlight, in the spirit of creating, Dr. Bettina Love is coming out with the Abolitionist Teaching Network. So, be ready for that. Also, Quetzal Consulting, be ready for them. They're actually ready for y'all, so hit them up. Also, Flourish Agenda, which is the consulting organization that I work with Dr. Sean Ginwright, thinking about abundant beginnings, who has really taught us what preschools can look like outside of school walls. There's so many things already out there, y'all. And so I challenge us that in the same spirit of asking us, that y'all ask yourselves and Google that shit. We got that technology, that access at our fingertips. And so, start doing some research. And lastly, what I want to say is create some working groups, y'all. Find when 2 and 3 are gathered together, that power is so real. So who do you know in your networks that want to invest in this learning with you? How can you create protocols and ways of maybe just having shared reading? Start with Bettina's book. Start with We Want to Do More Than Survive. Make a book club. Meet once every 2 weeks if need be. Create some sort of process for you to work with one another and to really have these conversations. And lastly, if you weren't able to register and you're really wanting to get more information about Lessons in Liberation that is going to be coming out, check out Education for Liberation Network. Google us, subscribe to our mailing list. Teachers for Social Justice, subscribe to these mailing lists, because these folks, these networks, this is what we're about. We're about connecting one another nationally, locally, right? And part of that connection is really because we understand this work to not be individual. Teaching is never an individual act, right? And so find your peoples. And if you don't know anybody, then tap into these networks and make some new friends, y'all. I know we talk about no new friends, but sometimes we need some new friends. And so I challenge us, let's make some new friends, right? And so in that spirit, I'm sending everybody love. I'm going to ask that wherever you are, that you channel some good love and light and energy to all the folks who are on the streets right now, to all the folks who are behind computers writing blogs right now, to all the folks who are doing research to make sure that our stories are heard right now, to all the folks who are caretaking, who are doing justice work in their own homes right now. Wherever you are doing this justice work, we send you love, we send you spirit, and we're in this together. So much love, y'all. Blessings.